to Open Dialogue here on Ahlebait TV. Thank you so much for supporting and tuning in to the live show tonight. And we are here discussing current social issues. We have another guest today, and the topic is quite vital. I do like to push the boundaries and also test the waters on taboo topics. I just want to give a warning to the viewers that some of the content will be slightly explicit because of the issues that we're going to raise tonight, but it is for really, really important, vital sort of awareness that we're going to give. Firstly, I'd like to welcome my guest, who is Bilal Ali Hugh. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Alaikum salam. Fahima, how you doing, sister? You good?
I'm very well. I'm so happy that you're here joining me tonight. I know how busy you are, and I'm absolutely excited. We also have with us today our Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
We have another topic tonight, and like I said, I am warning the viewers that some of the terminology might be slightly explicit because of the content that we're about to address. So please be aware of that. This is a live call-in show, so if you have any comments or questions or queries, please do call in, and we will hopefully answer them. The topic for tonight is consent, and consent in your relationship. This is something that we kind of brush over, or we don't really speak about, but there are issues, and unfortunately there is lots and lots of abuse that does happen because there is not a clear, concise understanding behind this. And I want to sort of bring it from different angles so that maybe we can hopefully share some insight tonight so that we can actually take away some of the misconceptions, some of the misunderstanding around this topic. Now, when it comes to consent, normally it is with regards to two individuals agreeing for intimacy, but there is a journey before we get there. And when it comes to two people, even before relationship, they either want to talk to each other, they either want to get to know each other on various levels. And again, is that consent to where it may lead to? Now, I want to first come to you, Brother Bilal. When it comes to our relationships and giving consent, man and women, do you think it is very clear with regards to our understanding, and is there a clear definition of consent?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yeah, over the years, it seemed like it was a pretty much foregone conclusion, but for some reason, very recently, and we say post-Me Too movement, that the issue of consent has been scrutinized a little bit more in detail, and it would seem that, there isn't really a particular clear definition in many, let's say, Western, Western areas, jurisdictions, should I say? That's the word I was looking for. In terms of Western legal jurisdictions, that terminology may differ, and it seems there's a lot of ambiguity. And I'm wondering how we manage as human beings for the hundreds of thousands of years that we've been on the planet. That it's very interesting that at this particular juncture in society, that now it's emerged that consent is now this really ambiguous thing. How did we manage before? But yes, to answer your question in brief, it seems that ambiguity has hit society.
You mentioned the Me Too movement. When it comes to that, I feel that a lot of people, it's not that how we managed before. Maybe it's because now certain people are actually giving their voices out there and they are speaking up. And maybe also because of social media, it can be to the benefit where people are actually sharing these kinds of stories or telling these stories about what is right, what is not, or they're getting information as to what is acceptable, what is allowed. I know in the general sort of legal system, it does differ, whether it's in the United States from state to state and even in the UK, but there are strict guidelines. However, in our Islamic sort of teaching, I'm going to come to you now, Syed Razawi, especially when it comes to a man and a woman. And we always come to this point where we sort of quote one of the ayahs in the surah. which sort of states that I'm going to paraphrase, and you're obviously going to correct me on this and probably say it better than me, with regards to a woman always being available for her husband, and if she does decline him, then she is obviously considered to be doing wrong or bad. But I think also that interpretation has to be given in the correct form, because that kind of sort of, sometimes to outsiders, it kind of is viewed as in like a woman does not have a right to say no to her husband. Is that correct, Syed Rizvi?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a very delicate subject. From Islamic point of view, consent is definitely important, and especially in relation to marriage. Marriage always initiated from the lady's side. So the consent is given by the man. So if the lady is the initiator of the marriage, and the man agrees, basically, shows the real view, real Islamic view. And of course, when the lady is getting married, she has the right to put as many conditions as she likes to, according to her upbringing and nature and requirements and likes and dislikes. She can put all those conditions at the beginning of marriage, and if the husband agrees within the marriage contract, then the husband has to abide by the agreement that he has agreed. And once the marriage is done, the relationship, although the commonly known narration is that the only obligation for a wife is to give consent for the relationship, but it's not as simple as that. According to Islamic teachings, the wife is required to uh, give her consent for the relationship. The requirement is foreplay, and foreplay does not mean physical foreplay. Foreplay means behaving properly, waking up in the morning and respecting your wife, taking care of her, being polite to her, and that gradually could build up into an evening which it would encourage the lady to give her consent for the intimacy. So that's
That is so
the real meaning
important.
of consent.
I love how you've addressed this, because I think a lot of us in our communities, especially cultural sort of upbringing, does not realize that it is not just a 5-minute sort of agreement. It does take a behavior over time, and the consent will be obviously given in that way. So a lot of people sort of misunderstand and misconstrue that sort of ayah, and in the Quran, which they feel that especially as a man, they just have a right to sort of like demand, and the wife has to abide, and it doesn't work exactly like that. But you're right in saying it's definitely a sensitive topic, and I do want to remind the viewers that it is, obviously we're speaking with this kind of terminology because it is relevant to the actual issue, and there are many problems in our community, unfortunately, with this kind of what we're raising tonight. That's why we are speaking about this. When it comes to before marriage and people want to get to know each other, like the courting period, Brother Bilal, when it comes to men and women getting together, and I hear a lot of stories of, interaction, and a lot of people now, they don't really think that if they're speaking to each other, non-mahram, for weeks at a time, that again, that can be seen as consent to the other party, whether it's male or female. And all of a sudden, if they're speaking for weeks, and then if one kind of like wants a little bit more to say, let's meet up, let's just talk more on the phone or whatever it may be, then she'll pull back. So do you think sometimes that we are not actually giving the right messages or signals, or are we receiving the right messages and signals? And sometimes a person's character can be defamed because we're not, honoring how we should maybe interact when we're trying to get to know each other, and we're giving mixed signals. And some people are taking that as consent, that talking for weeks, we can go forward. How do we kind of, make these kind of things where it's not in that way, where there is a problem and we're not giving false sort of like information?
I think that it's pretty straightforward in terms of the rules. In terms of if you're talking Islamically, I mean, in Western society, non-Muslim Western society, I think it's a lot more complicated because there are less rules, unless it's like illegal. I mean, kind of, pretty much people, pick and choose as they will. But I think Islamically, whether you think it's okay or not okay, there's certain, rulings will get related to being alone, whether speaking, and are people allowed to speak in private, whether it's communication over, say, for example, social media, but contact each other directly. They maybe want to clarify things. They may feel it necessary to at least speak outside of the earshot, even if they have a chaperone and they're in a physical, a public place. But does the chaperone need to sit with them or just nearby, or and are these for practical reasons, or is it for the lady's safety, or is it just for a reputation? Is it just a formality now? I went with my cousin, or I went with my brother. He was reading a book or on his phone or something of that nature. We have to, I guess, dig a little bit deeper. What's the purpose? But I think ultimately, consent is either expressed or implicit. And what we're looking at now is that, I mean, once two people are not married, I mean, there isn't really much to consent. You ask to meet somebody, they say no, thank you. No, thank you, brother. But you can. But I'll tell you what you do. Here's my dad's number. He's my wali, and you can run it through him. I'm good with that. Kind of keeps it straightforward, right?
I love the fact that you said that, and you think it's really straightforward. But unfortunately, in today's society, because there's a lot of things that are happening online, and sometimes people think that the general Islamic rules don't apply. And I've constantly advised people to say that just because you're speaking online does not mean that you shouldn't have a mahram, or you shouldn't have someone that is actually beside you that know that you're speaking to the opposite gender. So I find that a lot of women and men are just as much to be blamed when it comes to them actually putting themselves in situations whereby they're having long conversations with the other person without even firstly an intention as to why that conversation's happening, and then secondly to continue in that conversation without any intention. And if one person thinks that, okay, we're speaking for weeks now, and that is probably something that's going to lead somewhere, and if it's not made clear, then it's really a problem where that person is, sort of like the character of that person is gone bad, to say, well, I didn't have any intention of, doing this, that, and the other, but all of a sudden now he wants to speak to me, or he wants to, meet me. And I never said that in the beginning. So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to consent. It's really a fine line. But when we actually perform in the rules and we actually protect ourselves with the guidelines of what's been said in Islam, then we actually take away from that. But I think the platforms, especially with the rise of the matrimonial apps as well, it gives a lot of leeway for individuals to speak. And I'm really actually coming across when it comes to the women, because they will complain about a man, approaching them and talking to them. But I'm like, well, you're talking back. Have you actually made that intention clear from the beginning? So is that now consent? The other thing I want to ask you, Brother Bilal, when it comes to consent, when we are actually intending for marriage, how soon is it that you involve somebody? Because a lot of the times, a lot of young people are like, well, I don't want to tell my parents or anyone straight away that I'm speaking to somebody. So how do you manage that? Because in practical terms, even with the rules of Islam, everyday living, even in the Muslim community, it is not that simple. A lot of the parents will say, well, you're too young to even talk to somebody and think of marriage, but they still want that communication. They want that attention. How would you advise some of these youngsters today?
Okay, I do want to address that question, but I just want to go back to the point that you made about brothers and sisters speaking on apps, for example, backward and forward, and then the brother wanting to, for example, meet up or speak a bit more on the sisters has a problem with that. I think that a lady has a right to reserve, like to change her mind. They say that's a saying. We remember as children, a woman has a right to change her mind in general at any time. Fine, but I think that sisters should, as brothers should, start at how you mean to go along. So you can't use fake outrage. You can't be talking, laughing, joking, emoji, love hearts, kissing. You can't do that. And then at a certain juncture, almost make out like that's beneath my modesty because I'm a Muslim. You can't. That's kind of like a little bit fake.
Yes.
Be real. If that, or if you're saying you was on that level with that brother, I'm not saying you should be, but just be in the real world that people do interact like that sometimes, even Muslims. It's changed, and let him know that it's not that anymore. If that's the case, but don't make out. You can't really make out. Shift the goalpost like who me. And that's not good. Start out and you mean to go along. And that one, the issue about the young people speaking and not wanting to tell their parents is a very tricky one because they may. What do they say that sometimes a lady has to kiss a lot of frogs before she meets her prince. So how is a young sister going to feel every time somebody approaches her to speak to her, she feels like she's telling them, oh, this person. So, it may take a few people before there's a serious contender. But I would say maybe set yourself a sort of time to say, I wouldn't speak to anybody beyond, I'm just going to give an arbitrary number. Like I wouldn't speak to somebody beyond a month without letting one of my parents know, for example. I would just maybe say set a practical standard because I can appreciate that the possibility of every time somebody approaches them, how they're going to go and mention it to their parents. They're going to feel a little bit weird. For the average person, the average sister may find that difficult.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that we said that. You actually took a really good point. Yes, of course, we can definitely change our minds at the last time, but that's where I think the gender are quite confused with the signals that women give sometimes as well. And that's where they can misread what is consent. So that's why I was saying what I'm saying, because even though you might want to gauge what that person's about, who are they, does not mean that they're actually interested in you. And if you pull back, and it's okay to pull back, even if you've been speaking for a while. But that's why I also advise and I give guidance to say that make that intention from the beginning. Because the other thing that we have the issue is that people are coming, say, for example, even if it's a temporary marriage, to say that I'm here, wanting permanent marriage, but let's do the temporary first. And girls will probably go for that, thinking that it's going to end in a permanent marriage. And then, in a way, is that actually giving consent in the proper manner, with it being, with the right intention, with the right sort of like, information? Because a lot of us will give consent from what we believe is reality and with a promise or with an intention. So yes, there is so much to discuss in this sort of like, area of consent. So, but I think a lot of girls are also scared to say that I'm talking to you because I actually want permanent marriage, or they think they'll enter into a temporary marriage with the hope that it will lead to it. And there's so much issues in the community, so much that
I feel sorry for the sisters. I do fear for the sisters because I'll be frank with you, sister. We are talking frank. There are some brothers, unfortunately, right? Men can be this way. I mean, women can be duplicitous in their own way because we're human beings. We have human frailties. But I'm just saying I'm spilling the tea. Some brothers will create an illusion. They haven't promised anybody anything, but they may create an illusion, right? Or lead one to believe that this is a first pit stop on the way to Nikah. So, hey, but they haven't said that. And they don't mean that either. And then when the sister ends up being, when the mutter's finished and everything's finished and it doesn't lead to where the sister had desired, she's left heartbroken. So there is that, but there's also our ability to delude ourselves. And where a brother has said, this is what it is, this is where I'm at, university, college, going to be going to Dubai, moving, he's given his reasons why. And the sister has deluded herself and says, I know I can convince him, change his mind, or he's saying that, but he has shyness or whatever the case is. And she do lose herself. And then when it ended, contractually, according to the calendar, then she also feels heartbroken or feels that she's been done hard by. So when a sister particularly steps into that arena, temporary marriage, she really, really needs to know she's putting on a big girl hijab, for want of a better term, and she needs to really consider what she's signing herself up for. That's all I'll say on that subject.
No, I mean, it is so important that I raise this, and I'm actually raising real scenarios, by the way. And unfortunately, it is not just one. We know that this is happening. We don't want to talk about it. And at the same time, I do also urge women that they feel empowered, they are working, they are professional. They need to gear up when it comes to relationships. And they should not feel that the pressure of either being alone or not finding a spouse at a particular age, that they should not have boundaries, and they should also abide by the Islamic guidelines, because it is for their protection. And just because somebody says something, you need to do your due diligence, and you need to make sure that you don't just believe every guy and then in the end slander them if they didn't do right, regardless if they were intentional or not. We all are accountable. Now, Sayed, when it comes to even approaching women or men, a lot of the times, yes, I'm not going to be only one sided, but unfortunately, we do find, especially in our communities, that it is the man that will chase, that will pester, that, and it is a thing where it is said as well that boys will be boys and they will continue as they are. So at the same time, where do we draw the line? Now, if a man wants to pursue a girl and she says no, but he thinks that no means yes, and if I have to keep continuously try until I get the answer, are we teaching our young men today that actually there is a process, regardless of what you are, your label, your status, no matter, even if some girls are taken away and carried away by certain individuals for whoever they may be in this community, they still need to make sure that they do what they need to do in the correct format. Now, if guys are constantly pestering, how does that play in the term of, they believing that they're just going to find their way by continuously pestering, and that is now okay for them, and the girl doesn't give consent, but is either sometimes, continuously being bothered. And if they don't give a response, for me, I say no response is a response, but even that is taken as no, she wants more. Like, how would you educate young men today with that sort of mentality? Because it's like the game of chase. It is the norm to keep chasing. And some girls even might say, well, they need to keep trying harder. So sometimes they even would, some guys will argue they ask for it. How do we get out of this? Even with the Islamic rulings, unfortunately, it is not being adhered to in the daily practice of girls and guys meeting today.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to explain about Islamic transactions, and then I will answer this question. From Islamic point of view, for example, if I buy a cup of tea, I have to do the formula, but practically we don't do it. But the requirement is that the person who's giving a cup of tea to me has to say, I sold this cup of tea to you for £1. And then the person who's buying the cup of tea should say, I bought this cup of tea for £1, and then it becomes a legal transaction, and then he can drink the cup of tea, and another person can accept the pound in return. But in practice, these kind of formulas are not recited for the minor contracts and agreements. And in Islam, marriage or buying a piece of land or buying a huge farm, these or factory, these are big transactions, and there is a very strict guideline that when you're doing these kind of contracts, you should call witnesses, you should make everything clear, you should write it down, you should exchange the what we call formula, and then hand over the papers and take over the property. Or if you are getting married, first you decide everything, the minor details and everything, and the girl has the right to put out any kind of condition that she likes. So if the husband likes her with those conditions, he will get her, otherwise he will not get her. So that's why it is always encouraged from the lady's side to put the conditions. But culturally, this doesn't happen. Even the father and mother of the girl and brother of the girl would. I have personally witnessed that when I mention the issue of right of divorce at the time of marriage, I'm criticized and say said that, Maulana, why you are bringing the word divorce at this auspicious ceremony of wedding, and when we are supposed to be teaching them how to be united and together, why you are bringing the issue of divorce? Islam teaches us that we have to discuss all these things before marriage, and whatever is needed should be included in the marriage. And as far as your question is concerned, of course, um, we have to respect each other. We have to understand each other mutually. So, sorry, can you explain a bit what was the
No,
continue?
that's fine. You've actually answered my question, and it's very true what you've said, actually. And it comes to, I think, my next question, which is I don't think as women we have enough confidence in some cases or the knowledge to the rights that we actually have. And I don't think that we are actually maybe even probably going through the process of marriage in those terms of our rights and what we can ask for. And unless our families are educating us and society in the Islamic centers or in the mosques or whatever it is, I don't see enough premarital courses. It's not freely given. It is not widely spoken about. Unless you're in a problem, then you realize, oh, I should have done this, oh, I should have written that, oh, I have these rights. Like our Syed has even mentioned that, unfortunately, when even that is put there at the beginning, it is actually deterred when we have to protect ourselves in the future. And when I speak to a lot of young women, like I said,
Let me add one more point here.
sure.
Just in case, if a couple end up in a relationship without this kind of agreement, and then they end up having problems. For example, they got married, but they did not look at the conditions and restrictions at the beginning. I remember a few years ago during Tony Blair's government, they had commissioned the universities to do a research. What should the British government do for the kids conceived out of a relationship with just bodily consent? So we answered the question that, and the reason they questioned is because there are many men who start a relationship. The moment the girl is pregnant, they leave her, dump her, and move on to another lady. So they wanted to stop this irresponsible behavior. And Islam also has an answer for that. From Islamic point of view, if there was no restriction for their marriage, and they ended, a boy like deceived a girl and promised her and then made her pregnant, and there was no restriction for their marriage, but they didn't do the marriage, but bodily they got engaged into an intimacy and physical relationship, and that ended up the girl ended up becoming pregnant. In that case, Islam gives the full responsibility for the men to look after that kid until the child is grown up and becomes an adult, and the man cannot escape responsibility for making the girl pregnant and leaving her and dumping her like that.
Thank you. That's really, really a vital information. And I think a lot of us, again, we're not educated enough and aware of our rights, and the way in which we put ourselves in situations are actually deterring us from actually living that successful life in relationships. Now, Brother Bilal, again, when it comes to consent, do you feel that there is missed signals between men and women when it comes to consent? And do you feel that even if we can say no at the last minute, like there is maybe a behavior of some men that may be frustrated that they've wasted weeks speaking to somebody, or they get to the point of even where it's just about to have physical contact and then it's a no? Even if the law says what it says, the human behavior sometimes takes over. How would you advise men and women to get into situations where they are more closer to the 100% of understanding where they are at when it comes to relationships? They don't get to that point where there is sort of like mixed signals or pulling out at the last minute saying, I actually didn't agree to this, I didn't even consent to this, or they may be forced in some cases because they've actually gone too far in that relationship.
Yeah, and that's really sad. I mean, because ultimately consent means agreement between both parties. Yeah. And it should be continuous, and it can be rescinded at any time. That's pretty clear. That's pretty clear. But when we get into the other areas of consent that's related to coercion like force or threat or things of that nature, then it gets a little bit more complicated. But I think there is scope for more education for both women and men, because what I'm uncomfortable with, I guess, is like in the background is that we've got this kind of image of the Victorian woman, you know, so non-worldly. But we live in a society where they're in the humanities. I mean, this subject matter, although it's a legal subject matter, and although we're looking at it from an Islamic point of view, or in terms of like in the wider society, is a big part of it to do with psychology and sociology and the social sciences. Women in the Western world dominate the university campus in the social sciences. PhDs, MScs, BAs, works. So we can't really draw a picture of women like they're, mentally decrepit and they have no ability and no agency to think. Like women are, pretty genius when it comes to like the proven track record in the social sciences over the last maybe 10, 15 years. So I think there's more scope for both parties to be educated and for women to really seize their agency and be able to be given that kind of, I don't know, not just educated, but like workshops, empowerment, things that deal with things like role play and scenarios, not just reading the law or the literature just to know what words mean, but role play to say, this is how you can assert yourself as a Muslim woman in these type of circumstances. Like to say, for example, you said pestering, like a brother doesn't get the message and he's not going to, he thinks this is some sort of chivalry and she's playing a little bit hard to get. And she may just, maybe a role play to say, brother, please stop, or I will have to tell my dad. Or brother, please stop, or I will be speaking to Sheikh so-and-so and reporting you. So I'm not going to report you to the police necessarily because you haven't done a crime, but I'm going to, resort to male intervention because unfortunately some of this is caused by over men that are perceived to be over masculine, but the rescue or the safety of the Muslim at the end of the day is with masculine men. Because I'm sure if a sister is being harassed by a toxic, narcissistic man, I'm sure she's going to want a alpha male to step to her rescue and not an effeminate man to try, to address the situation. So we need more strong men. We need more strong sisters in the sense mentally strong and able to assert their rights.
I agree with you 100%, and I love what you said because that was my point initially, that we have got some really professional women out there with strong mindsets when it comes to their jobs or even, the theory of it. But when it comes to relationships, I coach a lot of professional women, unfortunately, that do lack in that sort of way of behavior for whatever reason it may be. But you're absolutely right. And I think that, yes, they do need to seek the help, and a lot of them do not speak out. They are too ashamed to even bring it up. And the other point is there is no real safe space for these women to go to. I'm going to tell you right now, this is how it is. A lot of the times, especially in our Muslim communities, unfortunately, they are the ones that are questioned more as to their credibility, their virtuousness first before addressing the issue. So they don't want to go through that.
If that's the case, we've got a problem, sister. We've got a problem. I've even heard of scenarios, even if we're dealing with the more extreme end of lack of consent, where men have taken it to the ultimate extreme and taken something that wasn't given to them. And then I've heard in some, not say the UK, but just in some Muslim societies where when the sister has gone to report this, people are saying, have you got no shame? How could you speak about something like that? Exactly. Or in worse extreme cases saying, well, to protect the family honor, maybe we should get you married to that guy. So then it's kind of above board because he's your husband. So re-traumatizing her. We're not well. We're not doing too good in these areas. I don't mean to throw us under the bus. We're one people, but when we have, when we need to do house cleaning, even if feathers are ruffled, we need to do house cleaning because things of this nature can ruin people's lives. People end up taking things like this to the grave. It's not cool.
Absolutely.
It's not cool.
No, I think we've raised a lot of issues today, and I still think there's a lot of work to be done in this area, especially in the community. Firstly, women need to feel safe in order if they're going to speak out. They shouldn't be criticized as to where they're going to go and what they're going to do and how it's going to look to the wider community when they themselves are actually going through some trauma. And especially when there's no safe space in the actual community at this very moment in time, because I've searched and I certainly haven't found it. And it cannot be trusted as well if they are going there. So there's the, you know, the lack of confidentiality maybe with certain individuals that are of leaders or scholars, and even if they are informing their, you know, their wives or whoever it may be, and then in the end that lady's name is being tarnished, or, you know, whatever it may be, or that man even, because it does work both ways in a lot of cases too.
True.
Now, we have raised a lot, but unfortunately, we've only got 5 minutes left. And inshallah, you know, we've given some sort of information. I know our shows go really quickly, but before we end, I just want to give Brother Bilal quickly a chance for you to end with this sort of lasting words for this topic tonight.
Okay, well, my words would just be, sisters and brothers, know your rights. Remember the adab, and maybe as a community, we need to create the safe spaces that you mentioned that are not there. We don't have to wait for the scholars, but just the people, just the professionals. Even they can initiate.
Absolutely. Syed Rizvi, you've got a couple of minutes before we end. What would you like to say?
Yes, I mean, I think the reason there are problems in our society, majority of these couple are not educated. We need to have classes in our centers and madrasas, especially for teenage girls and boys, to explain to them what are their rights and what they have to be careful. Even today, I was discussing a lady called me. She said, I was told by everyone that if you are separate from your husband for more than 6 months, you're automatically divorced. And I ended up in a muta relationship. I said that
Oh,
is
wow.
haram because you are still married to that person. So this is the sign of lack of education, and ulama and centers are responsible to educate, and these TV channels are responsible to educate and create awareness. Uh, I'm not telling. Well, in this society, everything is taught to the youngsters, which should not be taught. So why should we not teach we as a Muslims should not teach our boys and girls what to be careful and what not to be careful of.
Definitely, absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you. Said Rezavi again for your amazing insights, and Brother Bilal again. Thank you so much for your time and amazing
Thank you,
talk as well. Really appreciate it. Always lovely to have you on the show. Inshallah, we collaborate again soon. Take care and have a lovely evening. And I love you for tuning in tonight. It's an absolute pleasure that you support the show, and you actually send in your comments and questions and anything that you do require. I hope that tonight has been an eye-opener for some of the questions that are going on in the community. I love these sort of topics only because it does bring about more awareness and insight so that we can only be informed better. And then with that information, we can behave better, treat ourselves and each other in the best way possible. Inshallah, we will be back with another episode next.